This quick video is going to look at Shakespeare's writing. Now, when looking at Shakespeare's writing, we need to look at the form and the type of writing that he is. Now, most of us are familiar with what a haiku is. A haiku is a very, very controlled poem, which starts with 5 syllables in the first line, 7 in the next line, and 5 in the last one. And it's a very, very concise, condensed poem. And all haikus follow this structure. And the idea is that you're going to have, overall, you're going to have 17 syllables in the whole poem. Now, Shakespeare does something very, very similar with his writing. He does something called Iambic Pentameter. And this is an example here. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Now, what we can actually do is we can have a look at this and actually look at how the writer uses syllables. And you can see that what we've done there is we've put the syllables and we've separated them. And we've separated them in a different way. So you can see that as we read it, these are the different syllables. So, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. And you can see that there's the syllables in there. Now, Shakespeare does something quite clever. He does something called Iambic Pentameter. And that Iambic Pentameter is where you have a unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. And so when you hear it, you'll notice there's a slight emphasis on that second syllable. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And you can hear the difference in there. Now, Shakespeare does this quite a lot in his plays, and he uses it very, very often in his poems as well. Now, I need to be very, very clear, because what we're looking at is we're looking at plays and poetry in quite a high level in terms of understanding. And so what we are looking at is we're looking at the meter and we're looking at the use of syllables in a line. So what we tend to have is we have a foot, and a foot is usually what we describe poetry in terms of. Okay, so this is 1 foot, shall I, and a foot, and in particular we've got a stressed and unstressed syllable. So you can see that we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we've got 5 feet in a line, and pent meaning 5. And so we have 5, a meter of 5. So you can see that this is the structure of we've got. And so an iambic, an iamb, is basically the meaning where you have a stressed and unstressed syllable in a foot. And you can have different ones. You can have 2 stressed, or you can have 2 unstressed, or you can have a number of different type of feet. But an iamb is the one that Shakespeare uses often, which is the unstressed followed by a stressed. And here we've got the full poem, and all the way through we've got this iambic pentameter here. Now we're going to have a look at this because you're probably thinking, how am I going to use iambic pentameter in my discussion? How am I going to be able to talk about it when I'm talking about Shakespeare? So we're going to take an extract from Romeo and Juliet, which is a scene where Romeo sees Juliet on a balcony. She doesn't see him, and he says the following thing: "But soft what light through yonder window breaks. It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, who is already sick and pale with grief, that thou, her maid, art far more fair than she, but not her maid, since she is envious. Her vestal livery is but sick and green, and none but fools do wear it. Cast it off. It is my lady. Oh, it is my love." Okay, so when we look at the extract and we look at it at the stressed and unstressed syllables, you can start seeing what Shakespeare's doing. And so you can see in the opening we've got iambic pentameter here because we've got our 5 feet. Okay, and that's our standard 10 syllables. But then what you do is you notice that actually sometimes the stresses move about. And if you have a look on the next line, we've got East, Juliet, and the sun, all kind of the stresses in the word. Now what's quite interesting, okay, is that this is all about Juliet and how great Juliet is, and it's kind of linking Juliet and sun. And you can see that the stresses are happening in the word. But also you can see where Shakespeare's breaking this rule of 10 syllables. And he does this sometimes just to put emphasis. And so, for example, here we've got an extra syllable in this line, and so it kind of doesn't ring true in our heads when we listen to it. So the emphasis tends to be on the grief, okay, and puts the stress on that last word there. And it's interesting when we look at Shakespeare's texts and Shakespeare's plays that actually Shakespeare doesn't keep the 10 syllables all the time. He plays around with it, and when he plays around with it, it changes the mood of the overall thing, and there's usually a reason. So one thing to do is look at, is not just go, well, Shakespeare uses iambic pentameter, but actually to look at when he doesn't do it and when he breaks that. And like, for example, here we've got arise, fair sun. We've got 3 stressed words all close together, whereas that's breaking that whole unstressed, stressed, stressed, unstressed. And so you can see Shakespeare's playing around with it. And usually this is for a particular emphasis on things. A bit like this East, Juliet and Sun. It's putting the emphasis on Juliet. All right? And it also helps us to put the emphasis on the last word. But why does Shakespeare write in iambic pentameter? Well, it's supposed that actually this is the natural speech pattern in the way that we talk. And people tend to think of it in terms of a heartbeat, that you go de-dum, 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 de-dum. And so what Shakespeare's doing with the writing in the iambic pentameter is kind of mimicking the way that we normally speak. Da-da, 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 da-da. So it's an interesting thing for us to look at when certainly looking at Shakespeare's language. So look for when Shakespeare breaks the rules and see where you can spot the iambic pentameter, but also see where he's breaking it and see when he's got lines that are shorter than 10 syllables, but also longer than 10 syllables. But also look to see whether the stresses, whether they follow that very, very pattern of the iamb, or whether it follows a different pattern. Okay, quick little test. Ask yourself these questions, see if you can answer them. If you can't, then you need to watch the video again to make sure that you know them. Okay.